Hey, we're still reading Age of Charon by Eneid Elisor on fanfiction.net. We are on chapter 3. Um, it wasn't Jarvis. Ooh, I'm excited. This is gonna be interesting. Let's just get right into it. The party was going well, Tony was pleased to note. The Avengers were enjoying themselves, maybe enough to close the very real ideological divide within the team. Not that most of them of or acknowledged it. Unlikely, but he could hope. The handle's imprinted, right? Like a security code. Whoever is carrying Thor's printer fingerprints is, I think, the literal translation. It burned a little bit inside that he couldn't hold the hammer. Not even Spangles had made it. He couldn't think of a quality unique enough that it would only apply to Thor and dismiss all other candidates. The man in question was laughing as random theories made rounds. Cheerfulness, perhaps? Rogers definitely didn't mean that one. Yes, well, that's a very, very interesting theory. I have a simpler one, Thor said as he stood and lifted the hammer. He even flipped it in front of all of them, wearing a smug grin. You're all not worthy. Tony joined the chorus of disagreement, but held in his real hypothesis. Perhaps pseudo-godhood was a preliminary requirement before the worthiness. Perhaps believing you were worthy besides just being worthy, and God knew there wasn't a more subjective and nonsensical term than worthiness, was also necessary. He certainly didn't feel worthy, not with his past and not when his work to change and make up for years of being the merchant of death hadn't ended. It would likely never end. Looking around the room, it was likely most of these people didn't feel so. Insecurity was a crippling human voice. Tell him, Tony. Rhodey punched his elbow and said, "What? He must have been more in his head than he thought to have noticed someone was speaking to him." His friend started suddenly when a loud screeching noise rang throughout the floor. Everyone covered their ears when he tried to think of what the fuck had just happened. The tower system wouldn't play any sound willy-nilly. "Stark," Rogers said once it had stopped. "Wait a minute." Tony answered absent-mindedly, his hands typing on his pad. "Jarvis?" The helpful AI didn't answer. He wasn't getting a good feeling about this. "Jarvis?" Nothing again. "Jarvis, this is not the time to play pranks, buddy." It wasn't. No, it wasn't. And Jarvis didn't do pranks. His youngest AI was usually too much of a goody two-shoes for that, despite his snark. "Jarvis!" he shouted as he checked the systems and tried to find the presence of the AI on the town service. Answer. A loud scream rang around the room, so loud most of the Avengers covered their ears again. Tony didn't even try. It was a heart-wrenching scream, not the type you heard about in horror movies. It was a desperate and painful and screeching, and so very fucking long. The sound cut. The scream hadn't ended. The audio they had heard did. Tony felt ashamed that the first thing he had thought once he realized the voice sounded like a young child was, it wasn't Jarvis. "What was that, Stark?" Not quite yelled at him. Pushing down the mixture of relief and worry, he turned to Hill. "I have no idea." "This is your tower, Stark!" Barton shouted amidst a choir of angry guests. Tony didn't have time for his guests at the moment. He had to figure out what had happened to Jarvis. Had he been silenced or worse? Ignoring the others, he checked the security cameras in the lab. That was where he had spoken with Jarvis, and where the scepter was. "What are you looking at here, Stark?" Rogers said as he watched him over his shoulders. "That sounded like a child. I couldn't make out the gender." "Do you mean someone took a child and caused that?" Bruce continued, making a wobbly motion towards the ceilings where the acoustics were. "You think someone kidnapped a kid? And they're using it to do what? Send a message? To us? Maybe it's just a Stark, but how would they hack the security?" questioned Romanov. "I'm calling this in," Hale decided as she placed a call on her phone and left the room. Rhodey placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tony, wouldn't they have had to get past Jarvis to do that?" Tony stared at the lab footage. The image of Jarvis's conscience was missing. "No. Tones?" He blinked. "Yes." What were they talking about? The scream? The hacking? Yes, they would. He got up. He didn't remember sitting down. He had to hold the sofa arm because suddenly he felt a bout of vertigo. He shouldn't have drunk. "Tony, you all right?" Bruce asked. He had to get moving. He had to find Jarvis. Just fine. Great, really. I'll let you work on the scream thing. I gotta go. He paused as he made the way for the door. "Stark, what are you doing? We have a child to rescue," Rogers said, always disapproving in his cat voice. He was getting really annoyed. He shouldn't have drunk. "So do I," he told Spangles as he addressed Rhodey. And then he then addressed Rhodey. Rhodey, you have the access codes. You can show them around security as you guys check. Good? He didn't wait for an answer. Great. Tony, Stark! He ran for the elevator. He had to get to the lab. He had to find Jarvis. He's fine. He's just fine. He couldn't even convince himself of that as he looked at the floor's numbers change. As he entered the lab, he stopped. What the fuck? The project for Ultron's consciousness. The one the scepter would help grow. Oh, it had grown all right. It had taken over the floor. No, didn't happen. Ultron did not just eat Jarvis. That's idiotic, stupid, imbecilic. Regardless, he had better remove the scepter from the room first. Yes, good idea. Let's do that. However, just as he made for the scepter's 3D image of Jarvis's Ultron consciousness collapsed and disappeared in flecks of light. Or let's not. The screeching noise sounded from the audio again, and Tony barely covered his ears in time. After it stopped, a scream followed. This was getting ridiculous. Tony went to his desk and started to manually check the code for both Jarvis and Ultron. Jarvis he couldn't find anywhere, but neither could he find evidence of a fight happening, of pieces of code broken or lost amidst the servers. Ultron wouldn't just overwhelm Jarvis. Jarvis was a fighter, a survivor. There would have been something, but Ultron's code, what the fuck was wrong with it? Why couldn't he access any parts of it at all? No matter how hard he tried, something blocked him. Another screech of noise from the audio, another childish scream. What was it happening periodically? He hacked his own firewalls to see if his only access as Ultron's creator was being pushed off. Ultron's programming appeared on the screen. Finally, here was something. He looked over the records he found. This wasn't Ultron. Ultron wasn't programmed like this. Even with the scepter's help, how had it become so complex, so adaptable? It was as if it was alive, he whispered, disbelieving. He checked the trials Jarvis had looked over. The initialization had been successful. How? They hadn't found anything that would have made... He looked at what now appeared to be Jarvis on the screen. This, a person. Ultron was a peacekeeping program, not a mind, a being. Even as an AI, this code, this mind was too developed, not as if it was newly created. The screeching sound, then a scream. Ultron noticed his intrusion and adapted. He was being pushed out. Tony tried to keep up, but he knew it wouldn't work. He couldn't hack a mind, not something this complex. He didn't even know how the scepter came into this, and where Jarvis could have disappeared to. Wait, was that another scream? It hadn't been Jarvis. He looked at the code that had disappeared more and more behind the wall of nothing as he typed. Was it? The sound system let out a screaming once more. Second passed. No scream. He waited, feeling ridiculous that he did too. Music blared around the room. The melody sounded joyful but slow. It was familiar. He couldn't say where he had heard it from. Had the genres changed in his absence, from sci-fi to horror movies? I've got no strings, that voice, to hold me down. He knew that voice, to make me fret or to make me frown. The screaming child. I had strings. It was singing, creepily. But now I'm free. It couldn't be. Ultron? The child laughed. All the screens and projections had turned neon blue. There are no strings on me. The lab exploded. Okay, theory time. The SI who had gotten reincarnated was like... The scepter was like infecting him. It was like infecting and changing his code. And it like mind controlled him, like when you use the scepter to tap on someone's chest. That's why his code turned bright blue, because that's the code of things. That's like the color of people's eyes when they're being controlled by the scepter. So the SI who got in is being controlled. That's my theory. We'll find out whether it's true soon. Yeah, we can do another episode. These chapters are so short, I can just like push on through them. See you guys next time. Bye.